Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Virtual Crosswalk. Thanks for tuning in. We've got a good one for you, a couple of songs, a meditation that I think is particularly appropriate for this high-stress week where our nation is going to be on edge and watching and waiting to see what happens this Tuesday. I don't know about you, but I am ready for this season to be over. And by season, I mean lots of things. I'm ready for the political season to be over, where we don't have to see commercials left and right. We don't have to get robocalls left and right. I'm ready for COVID season to be over. I'm ready for all kinds of things to be over. Aren't you? Well, the meditation day, I think, might help with that, not only for us personally, but also as something we can do and speak into the world. So that's coming up for you. The teaching today continues the Go Be Jesus series. Today we're talking about community, which actually is really appropriate given the tone of what we've seen in our country. More about that in a bit. But without further ado, let's get right to it. Enjoy.
I found a friend in Jesus. He's everything to me. He's the fairest of 10,000 to my soul. He's the lily of the valley. In him alone I see all I need to cleanse and make me fully whole. In sorrow he's my comfort, in trouble he's my stay. He tells me every care to roll to him. He's the lily of the valley, the bright and morning star. He's the fairest of 10,000 to my soul. He all my griefs has taken and all my sorrows borne. In temptation he's my strong and mighty tower. I've all for him forsaken and all my idols torn from my heart, and now he keeps me by his power. Though all the world's forsaken me and Satan tempt me sore, through Jesus I shall safely reach the goal. He's the lily of the valley, the bright and morning star. He's the fairest of 10,000 to my soul. In sorrow he's my comfort, in trouble he's my stay. He tells me every care on him to roll. He's the lily of the valley, the bright and morning star. He's the fairest of 10,000 to my soul. He's the fairest of 10,000 to my soul.
For our meditation today, first I want to remind you of who you are. So I'm going to be sharing a passage today, which will probably be on the screen. This comes from 1 Peter chapter 2, starting in verse 9. It's just a few verses, actually. It's just 2 verses, as part of a larger context about some beautiful things that either Peter or his disciples are saying. That's the reality in our New Testament, is sometimes letters are attributed to a particular author, but they may in fact have been written by that person's disciples. It's just how they did things back then. And so we have either Peter, the apostle, or his disciples sending a letter out, a general letter to the people. And he says a very profound thing, which is easily lost on us in our world. But this is what is written to the new church, this thing that is starting, this movement that is by this time just a couple of decades old. Peter writes, "But you are the ones chosen by God, chosen for the high calling of priestly work, chosen to be a holy people, God's instruments to do his work and speak out for him, to tell others of the night and day difference he made for you, from nothing to something, from rejected to accepted." Now, sometimes we can read this passage, this word about being a royal priesthood, a holy nation, this kind of stuff, and that can send us right into an elitist, exceptional category where we feel like we've got something up on everybody else and gives us the right to tell them how things should be done in that kind of a tone. But that completely misses the point. People in this day and age, the people who are hearing this, they weren't on top of the world. They weren't being spoken to as people who were citizens of a superpower like we are in the United States, or people who look like me, white people who have ruled modern history for longer than anybody can remember. That's not who's being told this. The people who are given this charge are people who've been told for a very long time that they are less than, for a couple layers of reasons. First of all, these are people who are under the Roman Empire's oppression, and they'd been that way for as long as anybody could remember. These weren't people on top, these were people on the bottom. And these were probably Jewish people who had shifted over to this new thing called the way of Jesus, which was at that time, in this tension with the rest of Judaism. Like, are you a part of us or not really? And you're talking about Jesus as Messiah, but we're not quite sure what to do with that. And so they were a little bit on the outs with the rest of Jewish people. These weren't people hearing this from a position of power and authority. These were people who were hearing this from the bottom rung, the bottom of the barrel, who had been treated by the people around them, both in official places of power and unofficial places of power, treated like dirt. But the word of God coming to them from Peter or his disciples was very different. He was saying, hey, don't forget who you are. You are chosen by God, and that's not meant to be, again, an elitist thing, but this is meant to be an elevating, empowering thing. Not to lord it over others, but to say to these Jesus people, these people who are trying to follow the way, you've got something special here. You've got something to offer the world. And if you've been chosen, if you've been called, if you remember back to the early days of the Go Be Jesus series, if you've been called to do these things, it means that you are believed in by God's self. That you've got something to deliver. You have an important message. You have an important contribution to the world that is deeply rooted in the heart of God. You are needed. You are important. You matter. And you matter now in 2020, perhaps more than any of us can remember a time where we were needed more. Time to be shalom, time to speak peace, to be a presence of deep peace, a non-anxious presence in a world. Because, as I'll talk especially more next week, I don't know how the election is going to turn out, but I know my message next week is going to be the same either way. We are people of shalom. We are people of shalom. We are people of shalom. That's who we are. It's what we do. And that's what we need to remember. We are agents of this thing. Today is All Saints' Day. Sainthood is not something that the Pope confers after meeting with a council of people and decides that you get to be a saint. Saint is more of something we choose to embody right now. And I'm inviting you into that moment now to realize that you are more than a Republican. You are more than a Democrat. You are more than an independent. You are more than an American citizen. You who've been invited by Jesus and who have said yes to that invitation, you are people of God. That is a higher calling. You are invited into this sainthood of being people of the way, of being shalom and speaking shalom wherever you go. My meditation today wraps around that word. We've done something similar before, and I invite you to do it again. To just sit comfortably where you are, and we're going to take this in a couple different ways. And close your eyes with me now. And as you close your eyes, just breathe deeply. Become aware of the space you're in. My guess is if you've been paying any attention at all or watching the news at all, it's almost impossible for you not to be filled with some level of anxiety. So just acknowledge that. Own it. Be aware of it. Say, yep, I'm carrying this around a bit. And as you recognize tension in your body, maybe in your shoulders or in your face, I just want you to take a big deep breath. And as you exhale, just try to release that tension. You might need a couple rounds of that. And it's not just body tension, it's in your mind too. I bet your mind is spinning, wondering about how all this is going to turn out, thinking about different possibilities, what could happen, what might happen. Take another deep breath. And release it. And I bet emotionally you're torn. I bet you're pent up. I bet you have anxiety in your bones and your heart. And so again, take a deep breath and release it on the exhale. And now that you're perhaps more centered, more into the space of now, more fully present here now, I invite you to incorporate the word shalom into your breathing. Shalom as you breathe in, as inviting the very breath of God, the presence of God into your life. And as you breathe out, shalom, a statement of, this is who I'm meant to be. Inviting shalom in with your inhale. A statement of solidarity of shalom as you exhale. Just take a couple of cycles of that. Shalom in, shalom out. You know, we're not sure exactly how prayer works, but we've been told by the ancients in our faith that prayer was effective. We don't know exactly how. We don't know exactly what transacts. We're not exactly sure what contribution we make when we pray, how it all works. We just know that on some level it works. Jesus' brother James in his book said that prayer of the righteous is powerful and effective. We don't know how. We don't know how it works, but apparently it works. And my guess is that many of you have experienced such power. And so as we continue this meditation, I want you to focus the prayer of shalom toward areas where you think shalom is needed. What comes to mind? It may be on a political scale, maybe on a national scale. It may be on a very, very personal healing kind of scale. And I just want you to spend some time directing the Spirit of God toward shalom, which it already is, but you're joining in it now. You're contributing your passion, your perspective, your will, your heart, your mind, your spirit, your soul. You are joining in with the Spirit of God as you think through and visualize areas that you are aware of, things that come into your consciousness. I'm inviting you to speak shalom into those things. Take a few moments as you continue to breathe, and as these images pop up into your mind of where shalom is needed, just say, shalom. Do it now. Spirit of God, you are always about shalom. You constantly work toward shalom, with shalom. And we offer ourselves to you now. We offer our prayers, which communicate our willingness to put our passion, put our minds, put our bodies toward shalom. May it be so today, tomorrow, and always. Amen.
We all start on the outside looking in. That's where grace begins. We were hungry, we were thirsty, with nothing left to give. Oh, the shape that we were in. And just when all hope seemed lost, love opened the door for us. He said, come to the table. Come join the sinners who've been redeemed. Take your place beside the Savior. Sit down and be set free. Come to the table. Come to the table. Come meet this motley crew of misfits, these liars and these thieves. There's no one unwelcome here. And that sin and shame that you brought with you, you can leave it at the door. Let mercy draw you near. He said, come to the table. Come join the sinners who've been redeemed. Take your place beside the Savior. Sit down and be set free. Come to the table. Come to the table. To the thief and the doubter, to the hero and the coward, to the prisoner, to the soldier, to the young and to the older, all who hunger, all who thirst, all the lasts and all the first, all the paupers and the princess, all who fail, you've been forgiven, all who dream, all who suffer, all who loved and lost another, all the chained and all the free, all who fought to the table. Come to the table. Come to the table.
So I want you to think for just a moment and ask this question and see if you can answer it at least in your head. If you think about all the TV shows you have watched for a very long time, what would be among your top, your favorite shows? Just think about that for a moment. What would they be? What comes to mind over the course of your life? I'm old enough to know the show MASH. That was one of the big sitcoms of my day. So was All in the Family. I was born in 1970, and even though I was a kid and a lot of this stuff was lost on me in terms of what the comedy was talking about, still knew the shows, and there was enough there for me to laugh at. I remember going up into the 80s, and then we were encountering, who was it? Cheers. Cheers, where everybody knows your name, and it was one of the biggest shows of that time. I remember Frasier started to come on somewhere around that time too. Bumping into the 90s, we had Seinfeld that was hugely popular, and Friends right after that. Now Friends has made a resurgence. More recently, you've got other shows that are deeply popular. Recent ones like Superstore is super popular. The Office, that one's past now, but also crazy popular. Some of you are huge fans of The Big Bang Theory. One of the ones that we just blew through all 6 seasons in the last several weeks because we didn't really catch on to it originally is this beauty. You thought I would say it out loud, didn't you? You thought I would just blurt it out so I could sort of pretend to say something naughty on a day. Well, I'm not going to say Schitt's Creek at a service, okay? I'm not that kind of guy that's just going to use a title like Schitt's Creek to put it out there and make people uncomfortable. I'm not going to do something like that. I only do that on Easter Sunday. Little Crosswalk Insider joke there. Well, anyway, this show Schitt's Creek just cracked us up. 6 seasons straight. There's some incredible things in that show which we really enjoyed. What is it about these shows that makes them sticky, that keeps you coming back for more, that causes you to want to binge? I think it's more than just a plot line or just a story or the drama. Most of the ones I talked about were sitcoms. I think it has a lot to do with the characters that are created, the characters that are written, and then the actors who play these characters. A lot of the shows that I mentioned are caricatures of people. They're wild characters. I think of Seinfeld and the crazy cast of characters. That's a show that was about nothing. there was no plot whatsoever. There's no trajectory. It was just one week after the next of, well, here's this weird thing we're going to go after and talk about. But really, it was just about this weird group of people. The Office, kind of a trajectory and an arc and all that to their story, but mainly it was about weird characters. Schitt's Creek, same thing. It's Superstore, same thing. It's the characters that get us, and it's the relationship between the characters. There's something about it that resonates with us, even if it's a caricaturization of reality. We see something of ourselves, of humanity in that, and it sticks with us, and we want to find out, well, how's this going to play out? Even though it's outlandish, there's something that connects with us. And I think it has to do with that relationship thing that's there. There's a community that's created in the shows that we watch that draws us in. It says something about who we are. It resonates. It reflects us. It's a mirror of us in some way. And in a weird way, we become a part of that community. And those communities that we watch become a part of us. Think I'm wrong? If you've been hooked on a show and that show ended, how did you feel after the finale was shot? Did you feel any sense of loss? I certainly have. they have become a part of us. They've become a part of our community in some way, even if it's just in our imagination. This thing of community is key to being Christian. It's key to being human. It's one of those bedrock indicators of mental health. If you don't have community, if you're isolated, that sets you up for mental health, emotional health issues, crises. You're more prone to depression and all the things that brings. We are designed to be together with other people. We are relational beings. You are in relationship with all creation, whether or not you realize it, and you are in relationship with every other person on the planet and the planet itself, whether or not you realize it. But one of the areas that we realize it the most is when we are in community together. We sometimes aren't totally sure if we're in it when we are in it and the relationships that we already have. But I can tell you with great certainty as a pastor, because of people that I've worked with over many years, that when we lack community, we are acutely aware of it, and it is painful. Well, we're in this Go Be Jesus series, and part of what Go Be Jesus means is to be in relationship, to be in community. And Jesus, who's the guy, our model, the author and perfecter of this faith, who showed us the way, he also chose to be in community. I know we talked sometimes, and last week we talked about the importance of breaking away and contemplative prayer and all that kind of stuff, which is really important. And Jesus is remembered for breaking away. But what was he breaking away from? He was breaking away from community at times so he could be alone with his thoughts, to drill down on what was happening with him, to connect with God in a different kind of way, because the rest of his life was spent in community. He chose to be with others. He was not a lone ranger. I remember the show Kung Fu. Speaking of old shows, David Carradine was the guy, and it was kind of a Western, and he would walk around alone everywhere he went. That's not Jesus. Jesus went around with community everywhere he went. He was constantly surrounded, except for when he broke away for solitude. This is a passage of who he chose, comes out of Luke chapter 6. At about that same time, he climbed a mountain to pray. He was there all night in prayer before God, so there's one of those breakaway moments. The next day, he summoned his disciples, and from them, he selected 12 he designated as apostles. So what we're seeing here is Jesus has more than 12 hanging out with him. He's got a body of people that are doing life together, but these are the 12 that he selected who are going to be sort of that leadership core. He called apostles who would become apostles. They're the people who would go and proclaim the good news that they'd heard. Right now, they're just disciples. These are the 12. Simon, whom he named Peter, Andrew, his brother, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Simon, called the Zealot, Judas, son of James, Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Now, we hear these names and we're like, oh, yes, those guys. Remember all of them so well. Some of you are new to this whole story. You don't even know these are just names on a page to you. And so let me just tell you about who these people are. Jesus didn't go to the local seminary and find the grad students who just graduated at the top of his class. That's not who he picked at all. He picked a really interesting mix of people. They're all Jewish. They're all, these Israel people. So it started off from there because that's where this whole thing started. So they were knowledgeable about the Jewish tradition just from their own life and experience, but he picked an interesting mix. A lot of these guys were fishermen. That's how they made their trade. That means they didn't make the cut earlier on to go into the rabbinical tradition, if they even wanted that. These were regular, everyday folk, a lot of them. Peter, who would become kind of the key leader in this group, he was a fisherman and became one of the primary mouthpieces for this new movement later on. This guy who really didn't have a ton of education. You have a couple other characters in there. Matthew, later we would find out that He was probably a tax collector who was looked at as a traitor to the Jewish nation, a sellout to the Roman Empire. That's an interesting conversation around the table. They've got another guy who is named a zealot. Well, that was a large segment of Jewish people who really wanted to see rebellion happen, revolt against the Roman Empire. That's what they were about. The others, not so much, but this guy, he had fire in his belly. He wanted to, grab the pitchforks and let's go. So that's interesting that he would pick that. And then one of these guys who shows up, who gets the invite week after week, Judas, the guy who would eventually betray Jesus. And Judas, we would later learn, was also the treasurer of the group, and apparently used to help himself a little bit to the offerings that came in. Need some, I think they needed some training from our church on how to handle money appropriately so that doesn't happen. The reason I'm sharing this with you is that this was not a bunch of yes men that Jesus picked. This was a divergent group of voices that Jesus chose as his leaders, as they would talk about what this movement was meaning and how they're understanding this perspective. That's really important as we think about who we're called to be as people of community. What we're talking about here today is not shallow relationships, but we're talking about going to the depths of really what deep love means. Jesus said the two greatest commandments. One is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And two, to love your neighbor as yourself. Some would say that loving your neighbor as yourself is to love God with all your heart, soul, strength, that they are so closely related to each other. Some of you might think, oh, well, that sounds like a Hallmark movie, that love your neighbor. Okay, love each other. Okay, yeah, but you don't know what I've been through, or you don't know what my community went through. You don't know what they did to me. You don't know what they said to me. I understand that. And what I want to encourage you to think about is what love might actually look like. And maybe the love that Jesus is talking about and displaying is deeper than a Hallmark Channel kind of love, where not that much of stuff happens during an episode. It's really not that big of a deal. It's completely predictable. And by the end of the show, we tie a red bow on it and everybody kisses and happily ever after. That's not what we're talking about here. The kind of love that Jesus exhibited and the kind of love he lived in this community was deep. It was messy. There was pain and suffering involved. There was forgiveness required. It was sometimes rough. One of the stories of Jesus, right after Peter, this fisherman who often, stuck his foot in his mouth, right after Peter proclaimed, I've talked about this before, but right after he proclaims, who Jesus is and he gets the answer right after that, he puts his foot in his mouth. And Jesus has to hold him accountable to his words. He even says, "Get behind me, Satan," because his vision is so off. Well, that's a statement of accountability. Later on in Peter's experience with Jesus, there needs to be a restoration. After Peter denied even knowing Jesus 3 times in a row, there needs to be this hard conversation. Love does that. Deep love does that. Genuine community does that. It doesn't brush it under the rug. It doesn't pretend like things never happened. It goes after the things that can fester. It brings them to the surface so they can be talked about with the hope of reconciliation and restoration if possible. People around the table that Jesus looked at with, when Jesus went and did love in a deep way, he did it the full spectrum of relationship. So there's this one story after Jesus does this incredible miracle of raising a guy named Lazarus from the dead. And Lazarus' sister, who'd been mourning, now she's not mourning anymore. She's elated. She's filled with joy. And there's this dinner party that happens. And she has a dowry represented in this bottle of perfume. And she can't help herself. She is so filled with worship and so filled with awe and just wants to show her appreciation of Jesus so much that she breaks the neck off this fancy bottle and she pours it on Jesus. And the disciples are looking at this. It's kind of making a scene. It's filling the room with this smell. It's an extremely expensive perfume. I'm talking tens of thousands of dollars in today's value. That kind of expense we're talking about. I mean, she is breaking the bank on this stuff. And she takes criticism for it. And the disciples are saying, I mean, people we could have fed with that tens of thousands of dollars, and here it's just dumped all over you, Jesus. Put her in her place. And Jesus doesn't do that. Instead, Jesus joins her in her joy. And instead of complaining and criticizing her for breaking the bank on a dinner and a cause for celebration, her brother had been dead, and now he was alive again. She wanted to celebrate. There are times when it's entirely appropriate to break the bank, to spend a little bit more on that dinner, to get a fancier bottle of wine, to go all out. There are times that are fully appropriate to do that. And Jesus, in deep love, joined her in that and invited the disciples to not miss the party that was so worth celebrating. There are other expressions of deep love. There was this moment when Jesus was having the Last Supper, we call it. And the disciples were all up there, and they all blew it. This was a big festival going on in Jerusalem. The place was packed out. Somehow they got an upper room to come together, but the disciples couldn't secure a foot washer. Apparently they were in high demand. And it was a really disgusting job, and none of the disciples were willing to lower themselves to the task. And it means that they had pride to deal with. Jesus sees that you got a bunch of stinky feet getting a little too close to the hummus. He decides to take matters into his own hands and make this a teaching moment. And so he goes around and washes the disciples' feet. This is love in action. This is love on two levels. Love saying, this is not beneath me. This is not beneath us. Love looks like cleaning the toilet. When we elevate different people or celebrate different leaders at Crosswalk, you know what the symbol of leadership is at Crosswalk? A toilet brush. When we have licensed people into ministry at Crosswalk, what is a primary symbolic gift we give them? A toilet brush. We don't wash feet anymore. Going to get a pedicure is a luxury anymore. But cleaning toilets, especially when they really need it, that's what we're talking about. And true love for other people says, I'm going to do that, even though it's disgusting and gross. It was a teaching moment for the disciples that day. There was another teaching moment that happened. That is when Jesus chose to break bread, which is where we get the Lord's Supper or communion. He gave it to everybody around that table, everybody who just blew it, who were too full of themselves, too full of pride to bend a knee and do the servant thing. He shared bread and cup with them, saying, you're still my family, you're still my people. We are in this thing together. We're gonna remember this moment together of what this thing looks like. And this is going to be a remembrance that we carry forward for a long time. This very different way of life where we learn to serve each other and love each other even though we don't deserve it. And even though we may have just made a foul. Because at the end of the day, it's not about the person that we're serving, it's about us. There's no greater representation of this at that table than a transaction between Jesus and Judas himself. Jesus chose to break bread, chose to offer this bread, chose to have the meal, even with the guy he knew was going to sell him out that night. Why would Jesus do that? Why would Jesus choose to share this symbol of love with somebody who is going to exact such a horrible witness of hate? Because it's not about Judas. For Jesus, it was about who he was. And who he was somebody who was deeply informed by his identity in God, as somebody who's deeply loved by God, who's called to extend love toward everybody. to give the invitation of love to everybody, even to Judas. Judas, after still tasting that bread and cup in his mouth, as he's walking to sell out the location of Jesus to the Pharisees, the leaders of Judaism in that day. I wonder if he had pause at any time thinking about what just happened. And I wonder if he stopped at any moment and just thought, what am I doing? Well, it didn't work out, or whatever that thing was. It was too late. That these other influences and temptations overcame him and he sold them out. But I share these stories with you simply to show you that this is not a Hallmark special kind of, frou-frou kind of love that, makes us gag. But this is real life kind of love, based not on who deserves loves in the group, but who are we as people. And if we are called of God to be agents of shalom in the world, then what does it mean for us to extend love to a world in community where it gets ugly and messy and there's conflict and there's misunderstanding and we blow it and sometimes we say it the wrong way and we mess it up, and there's need to offer forgiveness, there's need to ask for forgiveness, there's need for getting over stuff and moving on. That's what it looks like. To help us have a clearer picture, I've had a conversation with 3 crosswalkers who have each been a part of deep community for a very long time. And I just asked them to talk about it. And so I want to share that conversation with you now. Linda, that dinner group that I know you've been a part of, how long has that thing been going on?
Probably 30 years or more. We all used to go to the same church. Now we all go to different churches, but I think a part of the thing is that we have such history together. Our children were in school at the same time. It's just history. I know these people. I know their families. I know their kids. We all mourned with each other when our parents died. It's just longevity, and it's very meaningful.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. How often do you guys still get together? Like
once a week.
Once a week. That's fantastic.
Well, during COVID, we go to out in the country where the people have a beautiful home, huge big yard, beautiful pool, and we just sit around there and outside, and it's lovely.
Carrie, how about you? This birthday group, I think that's what it's called. Is that right?
The birthday girls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long have you guys been hanging out?
They started on when it was a couple of the girls' 30th birthday, and they're now 59 this year.
Wow.
So, and I joined a couple of years after that. So I've been about 25, 27 years. And same as Linda, it's we've raised our children together. We've done, we've been at each other's kids' birthday parties and camping trips and family barbecues. And like for Carly being an only child, some of these kids were like cousins growing up. It's community, it's extended family, especially for those of us, there's a couple of us that don't have family here in Napa. And so that's my family. And there's been times that we've invited each other over for Thanksgiving because we didn't have extended family, things like that, and just subset of us that met for years every Wednesday morning for coffee, just that weekly check-in. And when one of us is, sick or going through something, you're there to help them with their housework or make dinner or babysit their kids or and just doing life together through the ups and the downs and the laughter and the crying and the it's just and with our group too, and probably with everybody's group, we're such different personalities. We all bring something different to the table, which makes for such a beautiful whole. There's some of us that are funny, some are wise, some are like one's a nurse, and and so we're all bringing something different to the table, that when we're together, it's a really rich whole.
Okay. Really good.
Yeah.
And John, how about you? You've told me about this group of guys that get together and talk. Tell me about that.
Well, we meet every Friday morning. Right now it's on Zoom. I don't know how long it's been going on because I joined later when somebody left the group. So it's somewhere between 5 and 8 years, I would guess.
Mm-hmm.
And we usually, somebody recommends a book and we go through the book. And it kind of started off, we were a bunch of outcasts. We didn't fit in with the tradition that the church that we were in was. So the idea was to be able to explore some different things. So yeah, we learn a whole lot, and we look forward to it. There's about, I think, 5 of us right now. We've had more in the past, but sometimes I guess we're a little too progressive, so other people drop out, which is a shame because we would like to have, like the rabbinical tradition, have all kinds of different views and hash it out and see where that goes.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a really good learning experience, and well, with COVID, we don't get together, but we get together at Hop Creek every so often and stuff like that. So yeah.
You guys are coming from different churches, different perspectives, maybe different politics. I don't know. But how have you guys dealt with, incongruities, disagreements, different perspectives that might lead to conflict, hurt feelings, all that stuff?
Just doesn't happen very much with our group. We're very forgiving of those instances. I think we all kind of agree we just don't carry grudges, and we let it just flow off and just love each other through those times that, we had one girl, the friend that passed away, she could get a little abrasive sometimes. And we just would laugh and say, that's Kathy. That's just the way she is. And we love her in spite of it. And just kind of, yeah, that's Kathy. And so and for the most part, we all went to the same church for so many years. And we really, I think there's 3 of us now that we just don't talk about it that much. I don't know. I think what I'm saying is we don't let ourselves get to a point where there's contention.
Okay.
So, yeah.
That's good. Linda, how about you? You guys have been together forever?
Actually, it's been 40 years now, maybe even longer than 40 years. And like Carrie, we don't land on things that are going to be explosive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We love each other enough. It's like family.
Mm-hmm.
I know that my family, I don't agree on things all the time, but that's okay.
What if, Carrie kind of gave an example, but let's say somebody snaps at somebody else or barks a little bit or gets their feathers ruffled. How's that impact the group? What happens going forward? Is it kind of like Carrie said, where everybody's just like, well, that's just so-and-so? Is that how it works?
I don't remember anybody ever, they didn't talk behind each other's back. We all have our little idiosyncrasies, and there's one of our group, we dearly love her, but she's kind of a control freak, and it's just, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's not important enough to make an issue.
Yeah.
In fact, we laugh at her. She knows it, and we laugh.
Yeah.
If you have any advice to give, what would it be in terms of cultivating this stuff?
Just give it a shot.
Okay. Just put yourself out there.
Yeah, it may or may not work. I didn't know when I joined the group, necessarily work. I think there's about people from about 3 different churches that are involved. And I remember when I was telling other people, well, I'm going to Crosswalk, and I got this, okay, I don't know what they thought about it. But now most of the people in the group would say, well, I really would like to go there, but my spouse doesn't want to, change churches. But yeah, we've just been friends for a long time, and it's about learning and growth and stuff, and we're all into that. So
I think being very intentional about letting things just roll off of you instead of holding a grudge, or going to that person and saying, that kind of hit me wrong or something. I mean, I just being loving and not holding grudges and all of those kinds of things, that not letting our little whatevers rub us in dwell on it, and we just let it go and just love each other through those things. And it's those kinds of things. It's really like family. These kinds of friendships and friendship groups are truly like family, and you have to treat them that way. And be gracious with each other and forgiving and understanding of, she's having a bad day, I'm not even going to go there, and just let it go, just let it flow. And I think we all do that in our group. I've thought sometimes that if something were, when we first moved to Napa several years ago, I thought if something were to happen to Sal, I probably would move to Utah to be near my brother and my parents at the time. And as the years went on, maybe 10 years into it, I totally switched. And I thought, no, I would stay here in Napa. This is where I've developed those friendships and the family and the support and the encouragement and all of those things that, no, I would not move to Utah now. This is home.
Well, we wouldn't let you go anyway, Carrie, so it's not really glad you came around.
But again, their group has a way of making a plan for the next time, and that's sort of important that to have a plan. Otherwise, it falls apart, and it just doesn't happen. But with our group, we just meet either at a restaurant, or before we leave one evening, we know where we're going to meet the next evening. And it used to be at a restaurant, but now it's at somebody's house. And Carrie's group has a way of whoever plans what's going to happen next. It's really important.
Yeah.
To make that somebody takes the leadership to continue it until it's such a habit that you would do it anyway.
Well, I hope you've gotten some value today out of thinking through this aspect of Go Be Jesus, about what it means to be in deep community with others. I'm not sure what this means for you in terms of what your next steps are. Some of you are in deep friendship, deep community. Maybe it's your family. That's awesome. Maybe it's with a few close core friends. Wonderful. And so for you who are already in it, maybe it's for you to just take a moment and be grateful for it. And maybe to say to those people who you are in deep relationship with, where real deep love happens, maybe it's appropriate for you today just to reach out to them and say thank you for being that for me and celebrating it. Maybe you've recognized that in your community, in your circle, that there are some things that need to be addressed, that maybe there are some hurt feelings that have happened. Maybe there's stuff that needs to come to the surface to address because it's becoming a block in that deeper love connection with each other. And it needs to be talked about because Jesus did that. He modeled it. It needs to happen. Maybe for some of you, it's time to take the risk and put yourself out there and to try to find that new community again. And maybe it's in a whole new arena that you haven't considered before, but you need it. You need it because you need a place to express what true deep love looks like. And you need it because you need that coming from somewhere else. You need the connection, that relational connection with others. There are ways to do that, and especially during COVID, this has been really difficult. And in a way, what I'm going to say next is kind of preaching to the choir, because you're engaging this right now. But some of us have gotten so frustrated with the social distancing that we don't engage anymore. And even though there are opportunities like Zoom, which is, it's not the same, but it's not a terrible alternative, because we at least get to see people. We at least get some kind of exchange. We get to see each other's faces, their reactions. It's better than nothing. And I'm wondering, are there places, are there ways for you to connect, even on a Zoom level, so that you can at least have a taste of real community? You need it. We need you. The world needs you. And so I'm praying that you'll hear the invitation to take that risk, to go deeper in your understanding of who you are, what you've been called to do in this world, and that you'll take the next step to do it. The Lord's Prayer is one big yes to that invitation, to realize that we're a part of something bigger, that we're invited to say yes to a way that is not always our way, but is a bigger, better way, that in some ways we are completely dependent on God for our very sustenance in our lives, to say yes to not being swayed into temptation, to want something bigger, and a reminder that we are not the center of the universe, that there is a bigger affiliation that really will last forever, and that is the kingdom of God. So, will you with me pray once again the prayer Jesus taught us to pray? Let's do it together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great week.